I invite the member for Kootenay East to lead the House in prayer or reflection.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we commence proceedings today in this Assembly, we ask for divine guidance so that our words and deeds may bring to all people of this great province hope, prosperity, and a vision for the future. May the deliberations in this chamber be characterized by temperance, understanding, and the reason to the end that we may better serve those who have made the members of this House guardians of and trustees for all the citizens of British Columbia. Amen.
Introductions by members. Member for Nelson Crescent.
Thank you, Speaker. Today is a very special day for me. It is the first time that the Stronger BC Young Leaders Council is joining us in the chamber. So these are incredible young people with diverse experiences, interests, and backgrounds from across the province that are joining us here today. And some of the folks are going to be able to see the opposition side, and some of them are going to be able to see the government side. So both sides are able to wave to them. And I just want to be able to introduce them all to you right now. So we have Alexandra Mendewa from Coquitlam, Andrew Millage from Abbotsford, Orr Hager from Nelson, Clea Schooner from Bella Bella, Dacian Filepsko from Victoria, Damon Robinson from Prince George, Emmy Wong from Maple Ridge, Aya Abraham from Victoria, Hamze Dari from Victoria, Harry Bajwa from Surrey, Jake Toran from Kamloops, Gianna Pilanayagam from Vancouver, Malia Mercado from Maple Ridge, Maya Provençal from Rossland, Noor Shaker from Port Coquitlam, Prabnor Sidhu from Prince George, Riptaman Malhun from Delta, and Taya Wells from Kamloops. Will everyone please give a warm welcome to the the Stronger BC Young Leaders Council members. Thank you.
Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, we will be joined at the knowledge poll on the grounds of the Legislature by the organizers and supporters of Moosehide Campaign Day. Along with my colleagues, I will walk with the campaigners from Thunderbird Park to the knowledge pole in order to mark this important day. Yesterday, colleagues from all parties joined together on the steps of the Legislature wearing their Moosehide pin to show their support for this campaign. This BC-born initiative has grown to be a national campaign, highlighting the need for men and women to stand up and stop violence against women and children. This campaign was sparked by a single conversation between a daughter and her father, Raven and Paul Lacerte, reflecting on the sorrow of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Now, each Moosehide pin is an opportunity to spark thousands of conversations. Conversations about our responsibility to keep women and children safe in our communities, to teach men and boys the true meaning of love and respect, to tackle systemic racism and advance reconciliation, and to hold each other accountable. Today, I'm proud to wear my Moosehide pin, one of more than 3 million pins distributed by the campaign to date, as a commitment to action to end violence against women and children. There's much more work to do, and our government supports the work of the Moosehide Campaign Day toward a brighter future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Saanich North and Islands.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, today I have the honour of making 3 introductions. First, I'll start with Matilda Colvin. She is shadowing me in the Legislature today. Matilda is a grade 10 student from Gulf Islands Secondary. I had the opportunity to meet Matilda at a youth political awareness seminar that was hosted at the Salt Spring Island Library by Matilda and other students at GISS. Matilda is interested in debate, interested in volunteering in our constituency office in Saanich North and the Islands. We look forward to welcoming Matilda there, and also interested in being here today to see how this Legislative Assembly works. Will the members please make Matilda very welcome? introduce Darcy Reppin and his family. Darcy is the former mayor of Telkwa, now a constituent who's recently relocated to Salt Spring Island. With Darcy today is Finley, a grade 6 student. It's Finley's first time in the legislature. And Jacob, a first-year student at Camosun with an interest in anthropology. He's been living in Victoria for the last couple of years. Darcy has been advocating very strongly to me with respect to some issues around ICBC. Will the members of the House please make Darcy and his family very welcome? Mr. Speaker, I would like to introduce and recognize Bob Pert. Last week, Bob's 50 years of dedication to the environment was recognized by Nature Canada with the 2022 Douglas H. Pimlott Award. Bob is a resident of Sydney, and in my constituency, I'm blessed with many incredible constituents who are willing to share their wisdom, advice, and guidance with me. I'm honored to have spent many hours with Bob over the last few years. He has always encouraged me to stand strong in my defense of nature, biodiversity, and the environment. And one question he asked me several years ago always resides in the back of my mind. He asked me, if we are not standing up for the environment, who is? Will the members of the House please give a warm welcome and congratulations to Bob and his incredible achievement.
Member for Vancouver Kensington.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I've got 2 birthdays in the family that I'd like to share. My nephew, Theodore Roman Henry Arrow, is turning 2 years old. He was born May 13th, 2020, during the pandemic, and now celebrating his birthday, second birthday, as we're still in the pandemic. Theo is super active. He loves cars and trucks, loves reading. I look forward to our dinner we're going to be celebrating with his parents, Samantha and Roman, his big sister, Charlotte, and also the proud grandparents, Enrique and Maria Garcia and Lena Arrow. And I'd ask everybody to please join me in wishing Theo a very happy second birthday. And second, my goddaughter is also Alexandria Santiago, is celebrating her 11th birthday, just celebrated. Lexi is a grade 5 student, and we're celebrating with her mom, Maita and Paul Clemente, her big brother, Lexi's big brother, Antonio, grandparents Yoli and Bernard Dietrich, Antonio Santiago, and deceased Bonifacio and Fidelina Clemente. For Lexi's recent self-assessment in school, and this kind of sums up her as a young woman, she was asked at school what her plans are going forward. She said she'd like to be an artist, a scientist, and also the first duly elected female Prime Minister in Canada. She does note that Kim Campbell served as Prime Minister, but she would like to be elected. So I'd like to ask everybody to please join me in wishing Lexi a happy belated, it was yesterday, a very happy birthday to Lexi. Thank you.
Minister of State for Infrastructure.
Thank you so much, Honourable Speaker. We are joined today in the gallery, somewhere, by Julia Belinsky. Julia Belinsky, I knew her as a young volunteer, came to my campaign in at the end of 2016, early 2017. She worked as a constituency assistant in my office as well. And from there, went on to graduate from UVic with a Master's of Public Administration after obtaining her degree from UBC in Psychology and Political Science. Over the last several years, she's been living here in Victoria, working for the Ministry of Health as a policy analyst. We've missed her very dearly, and so I'm very pleased to note that she is now returning to the mainland to work with Vancouver Coastal Health as a business analyst. We're so proud of you, Julia, from North Vancouver, and we're hoping to be able to see you back there soon. Thanks. Sorry, would the House please join me in welcoming her to the gallery?
Madam Clerk.
Introduction of bills. Statements by members.
Member for Kelowna West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
West Kelowna in the central Okanagan is one of the fastest growing urban areas in the province and even Canada. Over the last few decades, we've seen the region evolve with the addition of UBCO, the expansions at Okanagan College, and modernizing to meet the needs of our residents. One area we have seen significant expansion is in the public transit with the addition of bus rapid transit. Transit is essential in any city. A good transit system connects neighborhoods and communities. It enables people to travel, offering accessibility and affordability, while also helping to fight climate change. It is a critical mode of transportation for youth, students, commuters, and seniors, and it is a benefit to the entire community. With our region's current transit operations and maintenance facility well over capacity, Kelowna has been planning for a new transit operations center. It's a project that has been in the works for a very, very long time. But just a few weeks ago, the project took an exciting step forward. The Agricultural Land Commission announced it was approving the City of Kelowna's application to expand and exclude 16.72 hectares from the ALR for the planned future transit facility. This is incredibly exciting news and will allow the growth of transit throughout the central Okanagan and beyond, while also supporting the goal of eventually electrifying the entire region's bus fleet. Investing in transit is essential for the future of our cities, and this project will make the Okanagan more connected, a more sustainable community, and while this approval represents just one step forward in a long process, I am so encouraged to see this vision take shape and look forward to seeing the positive impact the growth in our transit system will have on our region. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Member for Vancouver-Kensington.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker. May 17th will be the International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia. It was first recognized in 2005, and as of last year, it's going to be officially recognized and commemorated by over 130 countries across the globe. And Community will be marking this event. Community is a nonprofit organization based in Vancouver that works to improve queer, trans, and two-spirit lives. They'll be marking it with their annual breakfast. Looking forward to that. The issue of needing to be proactive and ensure that we bring an end to discrimination experienced by folks in the queer, two-spirit, gay, lesbian, trans community is so critical. When I came out as a young woman, as a lesbian, when I was 19 years old, I was in tears with my parents, and my mom reassured me she loves me, and my sister was mad. She was angry that I didn't tell her sooner. So I was accepted by my family, but really a testament in terms of the need to really be proactive and address the issue that so many face. And we know that those with trans folks experience more discrimination. We know that it's complex around discrimination against sexual orientation. It's a continuum around biological sex, how you're born. That's also a continuum. Born male, female, or intersex. As well, gender identity, how you feel inside, gender expression, how people think you should be dressing, if a woman should be wearing a tie. So all these factor into really accepting people for who they are, and being as well with the perspective of the intersectional lens, either with class or race or other issues that really undermine people. So I'd ask everybody to please join me, and I'm so pleased, and I can count on all the members in this House here and all British Columbians to join me in making sure that British Columbia is a place that is safe, and that everyone, regardless of their complexities that we all have as people, can celebrate, can flourish, and really live great lives here in BC. Thank you very much.
Member for Prince George Mackenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 33 years ago in 1989, a gentleman named Jim Good founded the Good Sir Nature Park, located a few kilometers north of Prince George. At the time he opened it, he made the following declaration, and I quote, "I declare this land of mine as Good Sir Nature Park, named after my grandfather's mountain, Mount Good Sir. Its purpose is to focus on all native plant life throughout Canada, that of our Creator. It was built on a janitor's salary, and I believe it will stand the test of time for future generations to see. You can't own a mountain, a river, a moon, or the sea any more than you can own a piece of land with a forest on it. However, in my case, God has entrusted me with this land to show off its beauty of creation through native plant life. He has made me a custodian of it to take care of what I have done, and someday it will be passed on to someone else." End quote. Devoted to conservation issues, Jim single-handedly built Goodsir Park as a hobby, personally funding it in addition to raising a family on a modest salary. A designated Canadian Botanical Conservatory, Goodsir Park offers 160 acres, highlighting a national collection of plant species. Jim purchased the land with the intent to create a space where his passion for nature and botany could be shared with all. He collected the specimens himself, driving across Canada, sourcing the trees, plants, flowers, and other native botanical species. Jim proudly provides the park, complete with groomed trails and information signs, to the public at no cost, and gives freely of his time to guide individuals through both the park and his museum. Mr. Speaker, on Tuesday this week, Jim Good proudly and deservedly received the Community Achievement Award at Government House, recognizing his lifetime achievement in making our community a better place. Congratulations, Jim.
Member for Surrey Cloverdale.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Carl Featherstone was a paid-on-call firefighter with Lake Country Fire Department when he passed away October 11th, 2020, due to a heart attack as a result of his work as a firefighter. His son James was 3.5. His daughter Natalie was 2 at the time of his passing. The whirlwind his partner Brianna was going through is unimaginable. I received a call a few days after the tragic event from Lieutenant Eric DeGelder, a Lake Country Fire Department member, asking me if I could help the family. Mr. Speaker, I was a WCB advocate for firefighters in BC for over 20 years, and I was sure I could assist the family. However, I'm not standing here in the House today to speak further to the tragic details, but rather to give thanks to the 2 levels of government in their roles of protecting families of firefighters whose passing is recognized as a line-of-duty death. Thank you to the British Columbia government for recognizing firefighters are occupationally linked to the exposures to firefighting. WorkSafe BC stepped up in a very quick manner and provided a multitude of benefits to Brianna at a time when her life was spinning out of control. Thank you to the Canadian government for the recent enactment of the Public Safety Officer benefit that saw the Canadian government create a memorial grant which is available to families when a line-of-duty death is recognized. Mr. Speaker, last week I found out the family has received this federal grant and found out this week Carl will be memorialized on the fallen firefighter wall in Ottawa this September. Mr. Speaker, this does not bring back Carl, but it does recognize the dangers of the job of a firefighter by both provincial and federal governments. Lastly, Brianna, you've remained strong throughout this entire ordeal, and those of us that have been involved along this journey want you to know you're not alone. Thank you.
Member for Saanich North and Islands.
This was prepared by Stephen Hume. Jim Hume surrendered his seat in the press gallery for the first time in half a century when he died April 13th at the age of 98. It's astonishing to think that Jim began writing about who governs British Columbia, about how we govern, and about why we do what we do before most members of our present Legislative Assembly were even born. He was here before the vote was fully extended to women or to religious minorities. He covered the election of the first Indigenous man as MLA and, 67 years later, the first Indigenous woman. He saw the elections of the first Black men and women, the first Indo-Canadian, the first province's woman premier, the first Indo-Canadian premier, the first social credit government, the first NDP government, the first Greens. In all, he covered 21 parliaments. Jim came to British Columbia in 1948. He arrived on the train to reach the West Coast after terrible floods of that year in the Fraser Valley. He was 24 years old with a wife, a toddler of 18 months, and a second child due in 6 weeks. When he first arrived in Victoria, although he had papers as a precision machinist, the only work he found was driving the city's garbage scow from the inner harbour, past the legislature buildings and out to sea to dump the overnight refuse. He later came to the building, to work in the building, same job, different location. He'd like to quit. But that was a joke. He loved the work and took it seriously. He loved the legislature and respected it. He loved the province with all his heart.
Member for Surrey Panorama.
When I think of sports in Surrey, I think of team sports like soccer, basketball, hockey, and cricket. But today I want to highlight how popular wrestling is and how many prominent wrestlers come out of Surrey. This past weekend, the Pan American Championships took place in Acapulco, Mexico. 8 athletes from BC competed in these matches, and I'm proud to say 4 were from Surrey. The Canadian team brought home 11 medals, including 3 gold medals awarded to Surrey athletes. Congratulations to Anna and Carla Godinez Gomez, sisters who began their training at Earl Marriott, and Amar Desi, who started wrestling in Khalsa Wrestling Club in Surrey. Congratulations to all the other BC athletes who represented us at the Games. The years of training and commitment to the sport start early, and many start in schools. Schools like Earl Marriott, Guildford Park, Princess Margaret, Tamanawes have had popular wrestling programs for years. Teachers Tom Willman, Gina Carpenter, and many others donate their time and talent to train and guide and mentor these young adults. Dave Mckay, another Surrey alumni, BC Wrestling Hall of Famer, was one of the coaches for the Games. Wrestling clubs like Khalsa, Rustom, and Breakdown work with kids of all ages and teach them the discipline, agility, and skill required to be successful. I want the House to join me in congratulating all of the athletes in their incredible success, and good luck in the upcoming Canadian Wrestling Championships and the Canada Cup next month. I know they will make themselves, their parents, and their community and their sport proud.
Madam Clerk.
Oral questions by members.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. The Doctors of BC, representing 14,000 physicians in our province, took the rare step of issuing a statement yesterday saying how deeply concerned they are by the Health Minister's recent comments that nurse practitioners provide better care than doctors. Family physician Jennifer Lush says, and I quote, "It was a profound slap in the face to every physician. It's smoke and mirrors, and it's a strategy to sow seeds of division rather than focusing on the real issue, which is that we have a crisis in BC of 1 million people not having access to a family doctor," end quote. So instead of smoke and mirrors, will the minister today acknowledge the value of family doctors, end the divisive rhetoric, and take action to deal with a growing crisis of healthcare in our province?
Minister of Health.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Honourable Speaker, the member was there. The first thing I said in answer to a question on physician's assistants was, I'm not saying, I said on the record, I'm not saying that care is better. And that's the case. In fact, family practice doctors are the heart and the foundation of our primary care system. 6,800. Over the last number of years, there are 600 more family practice doctors in BC than there were before. There are also, and we talked about nurse practitioners, who have also a very significant role, 400 more nurse practitioners. and they are working together to provide primary care. The reason you know that I don't think that is I didn't say it, I don't believe it, and I think family practice doctors do an extraordinary job in BC, particularly during this period of pandemic, when we transformed the primary care system together to continue to provide service for people. So let's be clear, I've said virtually every day, family practice doctors are critical in BC. They play a key role in BC, and we need to respect them, not just by saying so, but by doing what we've done with primary care networks, which is giving doctors and divisions of family practice control and responsibility on the provision of primary care in their communities.
Leader of the Official Opposition, supplemental.
Well, thank you very much to the Minister, and we should be perfectly clear about who heard the comments and how they were said. Doctors were watching across British Columbia, and their comments were based on what they heard, not what I heard. So to be clear, they issued the statement. They took the rare opportunity to issue a statement about what this minister said after watching his health estimates. Doctors are upset and angry about what they heard this minister say. As Dr. Anna Wolak says, and I quote, "The minister's comments confirm that we are undervalued as people and as physicians. It's an actual gut punch," end quote. Not my words. And I was in the room with the minister while doctors were listening and sending in their comments. Almost 1 million people in British Columbia do not have a doctor. And this minister continues to say everything's okay. Doctors are closing their practices, and many more have indicated they will do that because they feel undervalued. Will the minister get up today and at least acknowledge the impact of his words and take immediate action to fix the crisis in primary care?
Minister of Health.
Well, thank you very much, Honourable Speaker. And that the circumstance, the Leader of the Opposition talks about unattachment. There were twice as many unattached people in 2017 as in 2003. The rate of unattachment increased by 70% in that period. What that tells you is that that's a trend over a period of time. Only once in those 14 years did attachment get less. There were modest improvements in 2018 and 19, and the pandemic's had its effect. Every day we should celebrate the work of family practice doctors, and every day I do so. I understand what it means for our families and for our communities, and the need to provide care to patients. It's why, under the most difficult of circumstances, in this past year, the year ending March 31st, there were 1.5 million more visits than there were before the pandemic, in spite of those extraordinary difficulties. If anything tells you about the commitment of our family practice doctors to our province, to their patients, and to our healthcare system, it's that. And I and the government will continue to support them.
Opposition House Leader.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The question that the Leader of the Opposition has asked, and I will do so again, relates to the words of this health minister in the estimates process just down the hall from here. These were his words, and he can choose to deflect around that here this morning. He said what he said, and doctors across the province were outraged. They were paying attention, and they felt disrespected. So the questions are about the choice of words and whether they truly reflect how this minister feels about family doctors and their role in our healthcare system. And I would remind the minister that under his watch, 1 in 5 British Columbians don't have a family doctor. So this really matters. Instead of focusing on action to ensure that we don't lose any more doctors and that we don't have more stories like we profiled yesterday in Ucluelet, that we've profiled in James Bay, that we've profiled all around this province, that we don't hear more of those stories, but rather we see more doctors added to the system and fewer people being unattached. So once again, I will point out another statement for this minister. This one is from the BC Family Doctors Association in direct response to the minister's words yesterday. And I quote, "Such comments are disheartening and divisive. BC's primary care crisis will not be solved by fostering an us versus them culture," end quote. So again, to the Minister of Health, will he stop with this divisive rhetoric and focus on the action required so that British Columbians have a family doctor when and where they need one?
Minister of Health.
Honourable Speaker, it's unusual when you get criticized for comments, they don't quote the comments, which are pretty straightforward and consistent with what I've said for a long time. I think what family practice doctors in BC want is to promote team-based care. I know this because in our core family practice and primary care initiative, primary care networks, we've handed the responsibility for the recommendations and the frame of primary care networks and communities to family practice doctors. Just as an example, 160 of the people that have been hired on the direction and recommendation of family practice doctors have supported patients on issues of mental health and substance abuse care. Why? Because that assists, first of all, in getting people access to the best possible care, and it reflects what family practice doctors are dealing with in communities. We are working, what is clear, and this is clear for doctors and nurse practitioners and nurses and allied health workers, all of whom work in primary care, is that we're living in a moment where the complexity of cases is increased. And therefore, the system we have in place, the system we've had in place for a long time, the fee-for-service system, which depends on volume, is not well suited to dealing with the increasing challenges doctors face. This is particularly true of young doctors. It's why young doctors, in general, have told us they're not interested in taking up fee-for-service practice. And that's why we're working closely together with doctors in BC to address these issues.
Opposition House Leader, supplemental.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, let's take this back up a level. Under this minister's watch, an additional 200,000 British Columbians are unattached to family physicians. There's nearly 1 million British Columbians now without a family doctor in communities all across this province. So the actions that this minister have taken to this point are inadequate. It's not working. And more British Columbians, thousands more, are at risk of also finding themselves in the situation of not having a family doctor unless this minister starts taking the actions that are going to fix that. And this is why his comments yesterday, which again he chose not to address, his words yesterday, his words, are so critically important in this discussion. He needs to acknowledge the disrespect that were in those words. And he has an opportunity to do so here this morning. Dr. Yvette Liu is an award-winning family physician from Vancouver, and here's what this doctor had to say about the minister's words yesterday, and I quote, "Very disappointed that the health minister does not understand and appreciate the value of family physicians," end quote. Or how about this family doctor, Gareth Mannheimer, who calls the minister's comments, and I quote, "unfortunate and deeply disparaging. They have unmasked the apparent disingenuous nature of this government," end quote. Those are not my words. Those are the words of two family physicians amongst thousands that were disrespected and outraged by the minister's comments yesterday. So will the minister stop dividing people? Will he stop with the divisive rhetoric? And will he commit today to taking action that will ensure that British Columbians get the family physicians that they need in the communities where they live?
Minister of Health.
Honourable Speaker, I celebrate the work of family practice doctors every day. I celebrate the work of nurses every day, in the gallery or not. And I do celebrate the work of nurse practitioners, which is the core of the particular answer in question, as I celebrate the work of family practice doctors. I think that reflects the views of people who actually practice medicine in BC, who want to see the development of team-based care. As you'll recall, Honourable Speaker, other efforts have been tried. The member talks about 1 in 5. It was 1 in 5 at the end of 14 years of Liberal government. 1 in 5. That was the level of unattachment. And it started in that case at 1 in 10. And it went to 1 in 5 in 14 years. And there's no other source of statistics. That's from the Canadian Community Health Survey. They started a program called GP for Me that was supposed to address it. Things got worse. And then they abandoned that program and nothing happened. So what did we do? We started a program to develop primary care networks, to promote community health centers, to train more doctors in residency programs, to support and train more nurse practitioners. and to build out team-based care so that healthcare providers would work together to the extent of their skills. And that process has been led and supported by family doctors. I support family doctors every day. I respect their role, and I respect it so much so that they've been key partners in every aspect of primary care reform.
Member of Saanich North and Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today is Moosehide Campaign Day. It's a day for Indigenous and non-Indigenous men and boys to stand against the violence that Indigenous women and girls face on a daily basis. We know that violence often occurs at the site of resource development projects. The final report of the National Inquiry into the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls found as much. When a new resource development project comes to town, like Site C, rates of gender-based violence, child abuse, and violence and sexual violence go up. In turn, substance use goes up. And then the cycle repeats and intensifies. The Minister of Mental Health and Addictions knows as much because in 2016, as a federal NDP MP, she criticized Site C for going through without consideration to the impacts of Indigenous women and girls. 6 years later, this government has doubled down on Site C, Coastal GasLink, and others, while doing little to address this violence. My question, Mr. Speaker, is to the Premier. He's traveling to Site C this week. What is he doing to protect Indigenous women and girls from the violence they face as a result of these resource development projects?
Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleague across the way for drawing attention to the issues of violence facing Indigenous women and girls every day, and he does so on Moosehide Campaign Day, which is most appropriate. We are taking steps throughout the work of the action plan under the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples to address violence and systemic racism in a number of ways, starting with the Police Act, dealing with Indigenous justice centers, and so many other initiatives to address the scourge of violence and racism, occurring, of course, not just in the locations identified by the member, but across our communities, and we will continue to do so.
Member for Saanich North and Islands, supplemental.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to the Minister for the response. In June of last year, this government had put just $5.5 million on the table to support community safety plans, commemorating the women and girls who were murdered, and get this, training their own public service. This was as a result of the national plan for missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. $5.5 million, frankly, Mr. Speaker, is the equivalent to lost change in a couch to this government. Let's look at what this government was willing to spend more money on in 2021 than missing and murdered Indigenous people. $7.93 million for 7 advertising campaigns from the government's communications department. $30 million to mark BC's 150th anniversary into Confederation. An additional $8 billion on Site C. Hundreds of millions of dollars in subsidies to the fossil fuel projects. In June of last year, this government said more investments were under consideration. So through you, Honourable Speaker, to the Minister of Indigenous Relations and Reconciliation, he's had close to a year to consider this additional funding. How much more can Indigenous women and girls expect for this government to spend in order to protect them from the impacts of violence?
Minister.
Well, again, I thank the honourable member for drawing attention to this difficult issue. In fact, across every week across British Columbia, there are an estimated 1,000 physical or sexual assaults against women. And as the member would know, Indigenous women and girls are disproportionately targeted by that. Our government has supported the Moosehide campaign, the previous government as well, since 2011, and our government has provided almost $3 million and worked with the federal government to provide $4 million more and urge them to find funding in the private sector. We have done, as the member pointed out, as part of our BC's Path Forward response to the report on the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls, a community fund grant of $4.5 million, and we're supporting the Giving Voice campaign sponsored by my minister's advisory committee on Indigenous women and girls. There's much work to do to dismantle systemic racism. Our government is committed to that in a variety of actions, and in part we do so through the support of we have given to provide secure and stable funding for sexual assault centers, committed $22 million to do so. Mr. Speaker, there are an array of initiatives through many ministries to address the scourge of racism and systemic violence against Indigenous women and girls. We know this work must continue. There's much more to be done, but I'm proud to be part of a government that is investing in so many ways to address the scourge of racism and discrimination.
Member for Surrey White Rock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the shortage of baby formula is sweeping across North America, parents are already seeing empty shelves here in BC. Michelle Waslishin of the Retail Council of Canada says, and I quote, "Specialized baby formulas that do not have substitutions have been impacted for the past 9 months," end quote. Parents want to know what is being done to protect our international supply chain and ensure they can feed their newborn children. Now, I am sure the Minister of State has been briefed and is taking action. So my question is, can the Minister of State for Trade say exactly what steps this government has taken to ensure baby formula is still in stock on BC shelves?
Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker. And this issue is a critical one for the health of children in BC. I appreciate the Honourable Member raising it. And yes, the government is engaged on this issue, as we have been through the pandemic. The member will recall, on occasion, special flights being chartered in BC by the Ministry of Health to ensure that children get access to what they need. And we're continuing to pursue those efforts. It's an important and critical thing we have seen over the last number of years, but particularly since the beginning of the pandemic. Some of our traditional suppliers, including in the United States, restricting access to essential items. It reminds us of the need to build our domestic supplies of vital resources, and we'll need to work together with the Government of Canada to do this. But the government is engaged at all levels in trying to support and support the health of children, as we were during the pandemic. We took specific action. Issues were raised, including issues raised by members of the opposition personally with me, and action was taken as a result. So I appreciate very much the member raising that question today.
Member for West Vancouver, Sea to Sky.
Thank you, Speaker. Transit users in the Sea to Sky are suffering from a transit strike entering into its 5th month with no end in sight. 6 weeks ago, I asked the Minister of Labour to step in so people can get where they need to go. But nothing's happened. He hasn't done a thing. If this was happening in the Premier's backyard, or the Labour Minister's backyard, or the Transportation Minister's backyard, I'm sure this prolonged dispute would be deemed to be completely unacceptable and would have been resolved some time ago. And I think the government knows that. When will this minister do his job and put these parties into binding arbitration?
Minister of Labour.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And I want to thank the member for raising this issue, and I share the concern with the member, the impact this strike is having on the people of Sea to Sky Corridor. And we talked about this numerous times. That's why I have reached out, my office have reached out to both parties on numerous occasions. I personally have reached out to both parties, encouraged them to get back to the table, and they did. But both times, as latest as yesterday, they were back at the bargaining table, but no results. The talks broke off again, and I urged them again that the services of the Labour Board are available to them, the only phone call away, and the mediator is available. And we urge both parties to get back to the bargaining table, because that's where the solution is. But sitting aside, breaking talks, is not going to solve the problem. And the agreement is going to come when they're at the bargaining table, negotiate in good faith.
Member for Peace River North.
Thanks, Honourable Speaker. For almost a year, people from Lytton have been living in motels, waiting to know when they can return and rebuild their own homes. So you can imagine their disgust and dismay when last night on television that they saw a private company was allowed into Lytton to film a promotional commercial amid the wreckage of their burnt-out homes. The commercial featured two young girls without protective gear pulling a wagon through the streets of Lytton to the tune of Walking on Sunshine. It's been completely traumatizing for Lytton residents who are still barred from returning to their own homes and rebuilding their lives. So, Honourable Speaker, my question to the Minister is to explain how this is possible that a private company could film a commercial in Lytton before the residents have been allowed to return home to rebuild their own lives.
Minister of Public Safety and Solicitor General.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. I thank the member for the question, and I shared exactly the same concern as the member did when I heard that this in fact had taken place. This was a decision made by the Council of Lytton. It is not something that I would have done. The Council of Lytton does make these decisions, member. They don't come and ask the province for permission. And quite frankly, I found it mind-boggling that that's what in fact took place. But I'd also like to take this opportunity to also let the member know that residents are able to return to their property. What they do have to do is to check with the City of Lytton and make sure that there is protective gear. Currently, there is significant debris removal underway. The province is working very closely with the insurance industry, dealing with those residences who have insurance and making it clear that the province, as I have said repeatedly in this House, is paying for the costs associated with the archaeology work, that we want that done as quickly as possible so that people can get back and rebuild. But the reality is this. That was a decision made by the City of Lytton, and it's not one that I would have made. And as I said, I share your concerns about that as well.
Member for Shuswap.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. There are huge backlogs at the Employment Standards Branch that have only grown under the NDP's watch. Data shows that the number of unresolved cases has increased by 1,000%. 50% of cases are taking over 6 months to resolve, and complex files are taking upwards of a year and a half before an officer is even assigned to the file. This is hurting employers and employees who are waiting for resolution of their problems and can't get it from this government. What is the minister doing to clear the massive backlog of cases that are waiting to be heard at the Employment Standards Branch?
Minister of Labour.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Let's be clear. The backlog at the Employment Standard Branch always existed, under their watch, and exists today. Only difference is, Mr. Speaker, that under their watch, it was hidden. The complaints under their watch from 11,000 a year went down to 4,500. Why? Because half of the Employment Standard branches were shut down. Half of the officers were laid off. And if that wasn't good enough, they threw in self-help kit. And anyone who had a complaint, they were told, fill this, stack of papers. You're on your own, go resolve yourself. We are taking action. We're taking action, Mr.
Members.
Speaker. We have added $14 million when we formed government to add more resources, 35 new officers. And as of last year, we added another 24 on a temporary basis. And more are coming because we are committed to make sure that the workers who need help, when they feel that their rights have been violated, they get the help when they need it in a timely fashion. We're committed to that.
Member for Kelowna Mission.
Thank you so much, Honourable Speaker. Well, the NDP has now confirmed that their consultation exercises on their clawback of autism funding were nothing but a sham. This week, the minister charged ahead and ignored parents by issuing a request for proposals for the new hub model that will begin next year. This RFP all but confirms that parents won't have access to the same level of service, which will, and I quote, shift away from the concept of one-to-one intervention, end quote. When will the minister get serious about listening to parents by pumping the brakes and cancelling this request for proposals?
Minister of Children and Family Development.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. It is very important to be listening to families, and we've been engaging formally with families since 2019, and the Ministry has been hearing for years, Honourable Speaker, from many families that the current approach of patchwork access to services leaves far too many children behind. We're going to continue listening to families and service providers and community agencies and Indigenous communities as we work on the early implementation and as we continue forward with provincial implementation into 2024 as well. There's currently a survey available on the website. It's available in 5 languages because we want to provide lots of different ways to continue listening to families, and we're committed to working with families to get this right. And we know that there are far too many families out there who have a worry about their child and they want to be able to bring them to a service provider, a therapist, and be able to be receiving services now, not have to wait for a diagnosis. This is the new system that we're building. We're building it in partnership with families and communities and service providers so that all children and youth with support needs will be able to thrive.
Member for Kamloops North Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Inflation is at its highest level in over 30 years right now. Housing, rents, gas prices, groceries, all are higher than ever. Well over half of British Columbians are now $200 or less every single month from insolvency and not paying their bills. People have been asking for help now, and they're not seeing it from this government. In fact, the only measure this government has done to try to bring in affordability in the last while was Cabinet making sure they gave themselves their retroactive $20,000 pay raise while the rest of British Columbians are desperately waiting help. 3 weeks ago now, the Premier was very clear. He said he directed the Finance Minister to, quote, bring forward initiatives to assist with inflation, end quote. That was 3 weeks ago now. Price has gone up another, gas alone has gone up another 20 cents a litre in that 3 weeks. Can the Finance Minister give an update on when exactly those inflation-fighting initiatives will be announced? New inflation-fighting initiatives.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the member's question. You know, as a government, we recognize the challenges for British Columbians, particularly certainly in recent months. We also need to be clear that as people were coming out of the pandemic, as things are starting to open up, that the increase in inflation, the increase in gas costs, and increase in food costs is hurting those who are most vulnerable, Mr. Speaker. But I also think, Mr. Speaker, we need to sort of recognize significant steps that we have been taking and that we are continuing to take, Mr. Speaker. And I think, Mr. Speaker, around how much more difficult it would be for British Columbians if we hadn't been taking the steps that we've been taking over the last 5 years. And I think, Mr. Speaker, about, based on just some rough calculations, that British Columbian families, and I'm thinking, you know, let's think of a family perhaps in Surrey, Mr. Speaker. What would be happening to that family if we hadn't taken the steps that we took? They would be paying bridge tolls. Kevin Falcon brought those in. They would be paying bridge tolls $1,200, $1,400 a year.
Members, let's hear the answer.
If we hadn't eliminated MSP, if we hadn't done that, that was a tax that doubled under their watch that we eliminated, Mr. Speaker. That family is now saving $1,800. And the child opportunity benefit, Mr. Speaker, that's $2,600 in people's pockets, Mr. Speaker. And
and free transit for children, Mr. Speaker. So when I just that summary, Mr. Speaker, that's $7,400 a year in people's pockets. Oh, and ICBC, let's not forget that. I forgot that, Mr. Speaker. Not only are they paying 20% less in their annual insurance, but they're getting rebates,
Order.
Mr. Speaker. They're getting rebates, and the rebates. The third rebate, Mr. Speaker, is coming this month. The third rebate, Mr. Speaker. There is absolutely more work to do, Mr. Speaker. We are working to continue to deliver for British Columbians when they need it most.
The bell ends question period. Member for Surrey Panorama.
Speaker, I have the honour to present the Select Standing Committee on Children and Youth's Annual Report 2021-2022. I move that the report be taken as read and received.
Members, the question is the report be taken as read and received. All those in favour indicate aye. Aye. Oppose? Motion carried. Member.
Mr. Speaker, I ask leave of the House to move a motion to adopt the report.
Is leave granted? Aye. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In moving adoption of the report, I would like to make some brief comments. As members may be aware, the Select Standing Committee on Children and Youth works to foster greater awareness and understanding of the British Columbia Child and Youth Serving System. The committee also provides a public forum for the discussion of reports by the representative for children and youth. This annual report covers the committee's work in 2021 to 2022, during which the committee reviewed 3 reports from the representative: an investigative report on the importance of connection and belonging to a family, culture and community for children in care, an investigative report on the experiences of children and fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, FASD, their families and others who support them, and the representative's annual report and service plan. The committee also began its statutory required review of the Representative for Children and Youth Act, and for which the committee recently opened its public consultation. In reflecting on the committee's work, I would like to thank the representative, Dr. Jennifer Charlesworth, and her staff, as well as the dedicated public servants across many, many ministries, for the important work that they do on behalf of children, youth and young adults and their families in British Columbia. I would also like to thank all committee members, particularly the former Deputy Chair, the member for Caribou North, and the current Deputy Chair, the member for Peace River North, for their work and dedication to this committee. A special thank you to the legislative staff who support the work of this committee. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.
Member for Peace River South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and as the Deputy Chair of this important committee, I also want to just rise to recognize and thank the representative, the staff, and the many public servants as well who work so hard in front of the scenes and behind the scenes to help this committee and to help the people of British Columbia, the young, the youth, and the families in such a difficult situation in life that many of them face. I want to acknowledge the Chair and the members of the committee who work so well together on this important committee as we try to make benefits to help people in the province and Carn-VR and everybody else in the clerk's office for the great work that they do to support the committee. I know at the committee, they can be very complex, difficult discussions that take place, but it's important not only for the committee, but for this House and for the people of British Columbia that we have those conversations so we can work collaboratively, we can work collectively to try to help some of the most vulnerable people in our society. So I'm looking forward to continuing that work as we work as a committee going forward for the next year and years to come with the representative and with all of the people. Be an important time to do a shout out as well that we have the lines are now open, and just a reminder to people for submissions as we're looking at the role of the representative, and we want to ensure that people come forward with their ideas, their thoughts, and as we undertake the statutory review. So with that, thank you, Honourable Chair.
Members, the question is the adoption of the report. All those in favor indicate aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Madam Clerk.
Orders of the day.
Government House Leader.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. In this chamber, I call for the committee stage on Bill 10, Labour Relations Code Amendment Act, and in Committee of Supply, Douglas Fir Room, I call continued estimates for the Ministry of Health.
Committee chairs.
All right, members, I think we are back for Bill 10, Labour Relations Code Amendment Act 2022, and we were last on Clause 5. Member for Shuswap on Clause 5.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair. At the end of the day yesterday, I was inquiring with the Minister with respect to what form of notification is provided to the employer when the employment branch is actually presented with an application for certification. And through you, Honourable Chair, to the Minister, just trying to get some clarity around whether there's a requirement for a written acceptance or some form of a written acceptance of the agreement or notification, I guess, from the Employment Standards Branch. The Minister had shared that it's his understanding that the Employment Standards Branch would notify the employer either by facsimile or by email
But my question through you, Honourable Chair, to the Minister is that is there any form or requirement for an officer of the company to actually sign or acknowledge receipt of that notification?
Minister of Labour.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I read the rules for specific applications under Part 3 on certification and what the requirements are. It says that where a trade union applies for certification under the code, the trade union shall file its application in a form set by the board and may at the same time present for verification membership cards signed in support of the application. Then it goes on, where an application for certification is made, the board shall A, notify the employer and employees concerned by sending the employer a notice in a form set by the board. B, notify any other trade union which may have a collective bargaining relationship with the employer. And then it goes on to say, on receipt of the notification under the subrule 2A, the employer shall immediately post and keep posted a copy of the notice at its business premises for 5 consecutive working days, or at such other place that allows all employees affected by the application an opportunity to see and examine the notice. So there is a process that the board has developed, and these are the rules that they follow. And how they do that is left up to the board. We canvassed this the other day, how they reach out to the employer. Employer now are required to post that notice in a lunchroom or other places where all employees can see it. And by virtue of that process, board will know that the notice is posted or not posted, because there's a union involved as well that the workers are watching in that operation. So board will know whether the notice is posted. Once the notice is posted, it's obvious that the employer has received it. And if it's not posted, someone from the operation or the union side will approach the board and say, application was made, but it's not posted. And that's when board will take next steps, whatever the steps they may take, to reach out to the employer, go to the premises, or whatever the process they have in place. They have those processes in place. And that's how this whole process works. So it's not that the notice is sent, everyone forgot about it, and an employer didn't even know anything about it. There are a number of steps that must take place under the rules. And if the board is advised that the notice is not posted, when they send the notice to the employer, board will know. Then the board will take the next steps to ensure that the notice is posted, to ensure that the employer has received the notice.
Member.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. And the Minister did read onto the record the requirement, but I have one additional question around that. Are there any limitations with respect to the days of the week or the time of day by which the Employment Standards Branch would actually provide that notification to the employer?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. So I read the rules that the board followed, and the understanding between the parties, the union that applies for certification, the board, the expectation is that upon receiving or upon receipt of the application for certification, once the board confirms that there's a legit application, they will advise the employer immediately, without delay. And that's the process they have followed, and I haven't heard any complaints about that. By the way, I'd just like to correct the member. It's all under the jurisdiction of Labor Board. Occasionally, they may utilize Employment Standard Branch officers, but it is the authority under the Labor Code to the Labor Board who follows through the application and then process following that.
Member.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and I appreciate that additional clarification from the Minister. So, as we talk about moving away from the two-step process and relying solely on the card check system, if I'm correct in hearing the Minister's response, is that there is no requirement with respect, or no legislative or regulatory requirement that clearly sets out or states the day of the week or the timing by which, or the time of day, when the employment or the Labor Board would actually be providing that notification to the employer. And so, I appreciate employment, or the Labor Board likely will take every effort, as the Minister has indicated, to provide that notification immediately. But should that application come in on a Friday, as an example, a Friday afternoon, and the Labor Board receives it, and if they were to provide that notification to the employer on a Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock, it's my understanding from the Minister's response that there's no regulatory requirement around the timing, that a notification could be provided to an employer at 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, and that there would be nothing that would put that offside with respect to the regulation or the legislation. Through your Honourable Chair, to the Minister, you could just confirm that for me.
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. My advice is that advice that I'm receiving is that the scenario that the member has laid out, if the Labour Relation Board office closes at 4:30, they have working hours. They close certain time. So I'm just using this as if they close at 4:30, as an example, and the application is received, say, 4 o'clock. And if they have time to examine, they'll send the email out to the employer before the closing time. And, or if they don't have time, then they will send it on the opening of the next business day. So if they open the following day at 9 o'clock, and then they will come in, and that's the time they will send the application or the notice to the employer out at that time. So that's the kind of the mechanical, operational issues that they have, and I don't dictate them. I think they are. I have a full confidence in the operation of the board and the quality of the service that they provide, and the due diligence that they do, because they have responsibility to both employer and to the union. So they have to take a balanced approach. What is reasonable? And so if they have time, if logistically they can deal with the application and there's a time to send it out, they'll do it. If they don't have time, then they'll come in the morning in the opening of the next business day, then they'll do it at that time. So that's the way my understanding is.
Member.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and I appreciate the Minister providing that real-world example of the potential for an application for certification to be provided from a union to the Labour Board on a Friday morning or a Friday afternoon, and providing there's enough working hours in the day. It is conceivable and legislatively and regulatory, I guess, accepted that the Labour Board could provide that notification as late as 4 p.m. on a Friday. And I just want to confirm that is correct, and that I've heard the Minister accurately represent the ability and authority of the Labour Board to provide notification to an employer as late as 4 p.m. on a Friday, and that would be acceptable.
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. They will notify the employer if it's practical to send the notice out before the closing hour. So whatever that closing hour is.
Clause 5, member for Shuswap.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. And I do appreciate the member or the Minister confirming that. The notification to the employer can be undertaken either through facsimile or by email. It does not appear, and the Minister certainly stand to be corrected if there's any additional requirement, but it does not appear, and it's certainly not my understanding, that there's a requirement for the Labour Board to actually receive acknowledgement of receipt of that email or receipt by the company of that facsimile notification. So it's certainly plausible. It's Friday afternoon. A notification comes into a corporation, comes in by email or fax. It's Friday afternoon. There's no requirement that the company provide written or even verbal confirmation of receipt of that notification. Through Honourable Chair to the Minister, can the Minister just confirm that just by simply putting that notification on a fax machine and sending it to the company, or by emailing a document to the company, that in itself would sufficiently or suffice, I guess, or satisfy the requirement of notification to the company?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I think the practical part of this is all managed by the board. Understand, once the application is made, notice is sent to the employer, then board need an employee list from the employer. So they will find a way to reach out to appropriate person in the operation. Without confirming the employees list compared to the application made and the card signed, they cannot proceed. So there is a process for labor board officer to reach out to the employer and make sure that those arrangements are made. And so that's how this process works. But again, I leave it to the labor board, and they are the one who manage this process.
Member.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and I appreciate that additional information from the Minister. I think I'd like to come back to timing in a moment, but the Minister references the employment list, and we've had discussion about the requirement for the Labour Board to reach out to the company to require or to obtain a copy of a current employee list from the company. And obviously that's incredibly important under a card check, because it's that list by which the the Labour Board would actually review the list to determine eligible employees and then correlate that with the cards, membership cards that were submitted by the union representative. So with respect to the employment list, through your Honourable Chair to the Minister, is it written either in legislation or in regulation that the employment list that the Labour Board would be seeking, is there a requirement that that employment list come directly from the company, either by email or by facsimile? And is there a requirement for an officer of the company to sign or in any way attest that that is true, a true copy or a current list, or indeed an accurate list which reflects all company employees?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Board actually order the employer to provide the employee list, not anybody else, the employer. So they must contact the employer who is affected by this application and receive that employee list from the employer.
Great. Thank you very much, Honourable Chair. And it may seem a bit nuanced with respect to, how that list is provided, but the list is incredibly important, as the Minister is aware, and he's nodding, he's acknowledging the importance of that list. My question, though, is there a requirement for that list to come from an officer, a signing officer of the company or the corporation? Is there a requirement either in legislation or regulation that requires an officer of the company, somebody duly authorized to sign and on behalf of the corporation to provide and furnish that list? Or could that list be sent in from a payroll clerk, as an example? And would that indeed, just the furnishing of that employment list, would that satisfy the requirement under the Act?
Minister.
Yeah, I don't think it's a government job to regulate who in the corporation must provide certain documents. It's up to the employer. Employer will decide, who is the person in charge of dealing with that particular case and the application. If they choose to allow a clerk to send that list, that's their prerogative. If they choose that the president will do that, that's their prerogative. Or some of them have HR department. They may ask the HR officer to provide. but it is left up to the employer, but the list must come from the employer's authorized person.
Member.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. And when that list is submitted to the Labour Board, is there a requirement for the Labour Board to collect or maintain or in any way document who within the corporation furnished or provided that list? Or is the fact that a list could come in from a fax machine from that company to the Labour Board, would that in itself satisfy the requirement? Or is there any other form of, I guess, written acknowledgement that this is indeed a true list? And the reason I'm asking the question, Honourable Chair, is that the request will come in, it could be late on a Friday, the owners of the company may not be around, may not be accessible, may not be aware. There could be anybody in a company that could potentially walk past the fax machine, see a fax coming in, and just respond to that by providing an employee list and faxing it back to the Labour Board, thinking they're doing the right thing. And so I'm just trying to make the determination. Is it entirely plausible that that list could come in from anybody at the corporation and not necessarily any senior management personnel or an officer of the company?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. There is a definition of who the employer is under the code. So when the rules that I read that the employer must do this, then they must fall within the definition of the employer, and the board will ensure that that has happened. Because now board, it doesn't just ends that they receive the documents and now all of a sudden certification is granted. No, there are a number of steps after that. Board must do due diligence to make sure that the list is legit. There usually is more than one phone call or meetings between employer and the board. More than one meeting or conversation with the organizers or the union representative. And if there are during the discussions, board finds that there are some concerns being raised, they will investigate those to ensure that the list is proper, to ensure that the cards that are signed and presented to them are proper and signed within the rules. That's their role. And when they are satisfied that the list that is provided to them by the employer is the list, then they also are satisfied that the cards that are presented for certification by the union are the people who actually sign, and they match the payroll a list provided by the employer. That's when they take next steps. But again, If either party believes that there is some concern that the board is not following through, or they are considering something they shouldn't be considered, or they neglected something that they should consider, there is a process for them to challenge the board. And there's a process for board then to further investigate, including hearings where both sides bring their experts, lawyers, or whoever they want to bring in. They question each other. They question the documents. They cross-examine each other. And that's the process. It's pretty robust, and that's the process that is followed by the board. And it's not something that something is new being created. It's there for a long time. And I have not heard any issues by either parties that there are some issues, some flaws in that process of determining the application is legit, determining that the list that is provided to the board by the employer is legit, and then the board will make a decision based on those.
Member.
Thank you, Honourable Chair, and through to the Minister, I appreciate that additional information. The Minister references the employer, and he's indicated that the Labour Board must notify the employer and that there's a definition which determines who the employer is. Through you, Honourable Chair, to the Minister. Can the Minister provide maybe the definition of employer and who at a corporation would be deemed to be constituted as the employer and able to act on behalf of the Labour Board?
Minister.
Chair, under the definition section of the code, the employer means a person who employs one or more employees or use the services of one or more dependent contractors and includes an employer's organization. So that's the definition that has been there for a long time, and that's the definition they follow. And anytime they contact the employer, they want to make sure that they have contacted the right person. And employer can challenge that they didn't contact the right person. There's a process for that. And employer can challenge that the list that they're using is not their list. So everything is in place to do the due diligence that the Labour Board, they do all the time. So that process is quite robust, and because, like I said, the board's responsibility is to both sides. They are a neutral body in here. And they want to make sure the natural justice prevails. And in order to do that, they have the procedures and the policies in place for them to follow under the regulations, under the code.
Member for Shuswap on Clause 5.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair. In the definition that the Minister just read into the record, it includes basically anyone in the organization. So from the definition that the Minister has provided, it is my understanding, and I'm certainly stand to be corrected if the Minister feels otherwise, but anybody in the corporation, anybody working for the company, would be able to furnish the list to the Labour Board, and that would satisfy the requirement of the Labour Board. Through Honourable Chair to the Minister, can the Minister just clarify that is correct?
Minister.
Chair, the definition of employer means someone who employs people. It's not anybody who is employed by the employer, as the member have said, that I think I heard. Also, I want to draw the attention that we have canvassed extensively in the past few days. Again, the process relating to application. Board must, in respect of an application for certification under this part, A, make or cause to be made the examination of records and other inquiries, including the holding of hearings if considers necessary to determine the merits of application for certification. So the board has that requirement, and they follow through it very diligently. And like I said, I have not heard any complaints about board not delivering those responsibilities that they have by either party. So that process, in my view, is not in question. They follow it through. Both parties understand that, parties to the certification, and board will ensure that the right person at the employer operation is reached out. They will make sure that the list is legit that is provided to them. They'll make sure on the union side that the cards signed are the people who actually signed and that signed under the rules and the procedure that are set out. So once they have done that due diligence, that's when they take the next step.
I just want to remind the House that we are indeed on Clause 5. The Chair has allowed considerable leeway in terms of discussion and questions far beyond this clause, but I would remind us that we are on Clause 5. So recognizing the member for Shuswap.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair, and I always appreciate your advice. The questioning around the process and manner in which the employment list is obtained from the corporation, the notification requirement, the notification for a company to post a notice for all workers to see is definitely part of the bill and actually and speaks directly to this particular section. But just as a follow-up to the minister, when the minister provided the definition that was provided, including I believe he had indicated a member of the organization. And any employee would be considered a member of the organization. So I don't want to belabor the point, but the point I'm trying to make is that there is the potential and the opportunity for a list to be provided to the Labour Board, certainly by somebody other than a signing officer of the corporation. That it is not unreasonable for the potential of a list to come in, a list to be sent from a corporation into the Labour Board by fax or by email by anyone in the organization. It does not appear, or I certainly haven't heard that yet from the minister, that there's even a requirement for the Labour Board to document who that list was received from within the organization. So the Labour Board could potentially receive a list from a fax number of the company as late as 3 or 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon without anybody's name attached, with no guarantee or certainty that any senior management or an officer of the company were actually even aware that that list was furnished to the Labour Board. I just want to make sure, because the minister has spoken about the rigor around which this process unfolds, and unfortunately, I'm not hearing that rigor, that rigorous process. And so if there is a requirement for any list being furnished from the corporation to be attested to and signed off by a senior officer of the company, I'm satisfied. But if that does not exist, I certainly believe that it is not a rigorous process, and that it wouldn't be unreasonable for the potential of a list to be furnished to the Labour Board to satisfy the requirement of the Labour Board without the knowledge of a senior manager or an officer of the company.
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. And my understanding is it's the legal obligation on the employer to ensure that the right list is sent and by the appropriate people. Because board must be satisfied that the list is legit. It came from the employer. And there are offenses if someone knowingly send wrong information. It is an offense. So it's employer's responsibility to make sure that the list is sent to the board that is legit, and also it is by the authorized person.
Member.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. Through you to the Minister, what efforts does the Labour Board take to ensure that the list provided by the company, from the company's fax machine or from an email, what efforts does the Labour Board undertake to ensure that that list is accurate? Like, is there a requirement that in receiving that list from the company, there's a requirement to understand who that list was furnished by? Is there a requirement for a signature from an officer of the company that's dated? Or is it just simply a list that could come in on a fax machine from the fax number of the company to the Labour Board? Is it only and acceptable from the Labour Board if that fax machine comes, or that fax comes in with an employment list with nobody's name, nobody's date, no verification of who it came from? Is this simply furnishing of that list in the Labour Board office? Would that satisfy the requirement of the Labour Board that a list has been received from the company? And would that list be eligible, or would the Labour Board be able to look at that list in order to make their determination? The Minister had referenced about the examination of documents, and I appreciate there's a requirement to the Labour Board to examine the membership cards that might be submitted and to also examine the employment list. When examining the list, I think it's really important to understand, is a employee list that has come in from the fax machine from a company, is that list without a name, without a signature, without a date, without any clear indication or understanding from the Labour Board on who specifically from the company sent that list, would that satisfy the requirement of the board under the current legislation or regulation?
Minister.
I answered that question, Mr. Chair.
On Clause 5, Member for Shuswap.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair. So from the Minister's, I guess, non-answer, I can only assume that is indeed correct. That from the Labour Board's position, there's no legislative or regulatory requirement for the Labour Board to in any way, shape or form verify that that list that is being sent to them has come from an officer of the company, senior management of the company. There's no requirement to verify with a follow-up phone call speaking to the president or the owner of the company. The only requirement and obligation of the Labour Board is to receive that list. And that list would be examined based on face value. And so, through your Honourable Chair to the Minister, the Minister talked extensively about the rigor around the process. Sadly, I don't see any rigor. A list could be sent to the Labour Board by anybody in the organization without any requirement that an officer or senior management of the company is even aware that this request has come in. But a list could be sent into the Labour Board from the fax machine of that corporation, and that unto itself would satisfy the requirement of the Labour Board. Now, that I believe is deeply troubling, and for a number of reasons. One is that the potential for a certification consideration by the Labour Board will have significant impacts on the relationship between the corporation and the employee. Probably one of the most significant impacts, positive or negative. We don't need to determine whether it's a good or bad move. It's just the sheer fact of a certification of workers in a corporation would have the most significant impact on the relationship between employees and the employer. And yet, there is no rigor, no requirement, no regulatory or legislative requirement, and certainly haven't even seen any internal policy within the Labour Board that would in any way, shape, or form guarantee or confirm that an officer or senior management within the company is even aware that this certification process is underway. So, through you, Honourable Chair, to the Minister, I am incredibly challenged and saddened that the smallest effort is not undertaken, the smallest policy or procedure is not established, whereby a list that's being furnished from a company needs to be attested to and maybe even notarized by a senior officer of the company. That would then give the Labour Board confidence that the list that was furnished to them was submitted by a senior officer of the company, somebody that has signing authority. And if there was any concerns around the validity or the accuracy of that list, at least the Labour Board would be able to go back to that individual and say, Ted, your signature's here. What do you mean this isn't a true and accurate copy of that list? But the Labour Board doesn't even have to make an inquiry as to who the list came from. So how would the Labour Board even be able to make a determination that there has been an offence filed, or that a wrong list or an inaccurate list was provided? But even a detail as simple and simplistic as that is not part of either the current regulation or the legislation that is being presented before this House. And through you, Honourable Chair, I'm absolutely dumbfounded that that lack of process actually exists. I certainly have some additional follow-up questions with respect to timing and the importance of that timing, and certainly looking forward to continuing this debate after lunch, Honourable Chair.
Just to be clear, the question has been asked a number of times, an answer has been given a number of times, and the Chair does suggest that repetition is becoming a problem on this particular point. So I would ask the member to look at further questions that are not about the exact same subject that we've been focused on for a considerable amount of time, with responses from the Minister and questions given back and forth. But I do note the hour, and I thank the member for noting the hour. Minister. If the Minister
Chair?
would like a response, there's appropriate time.
I answered that question.
Thank you.
Speaker. Honourable Chair, noting the hour, I move that the committee rise, report progress, and ask leave to sit again.
Members have heard the question. All those in favour? Aye. Opposed? Carried.
Committee Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Committee reports progress on Bill 10 and seeks leave to sit again.
When shall the committee sit again, Government House Leader? The next sitting. So ordered. Committee Chair.
Mr. Speaker, Committee of Supply Section A reports progress on the estimates of the Ministry of Health and asks leave to sit again.
When shall the committee sit again, Government House Leader?
At the next sitting.
So ordered. Government House Leader.
Now adjourn.
Member, you heard the question to adjourn the House. All those in favour indicate aye. Opposed? Motion carried. This House stands adjourned until 1 p.m. today.